Hello and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Today is Tuesday, May 13th. Hey, at least it's not Monday anymore. I got a good show for you today, though. Gonna go over Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, those SEC teams that were kind of on the bubble of the playoff last year. Gonna talk about them. Could they be in the playoff this year? Did they make enough moves to get them over that last little hump? Gonna dive into that. Also, gonna discuss Indiana, Illinois, two programs that have kind of been mentioned with each other, kind of on the same tier in terms of Big Ten contenders, competition. So we're gonna discuss them. Who would be more likely to make the playoff this year? Gonna dive into that. Then we're gonna do some ACC power rankings. Gonna start those today. We're going to start from the bottom, work our way up. We're going to go about 17 to 12 this round here, so we're going to do that. Then we are going to talk some Clemson football. Is Clemson back fully? We're going to dive into it. Make sure you stick around for my last segment when we go back to the Big Ten. Finish up our Big Ten quarterback rankings 4 through 1, the top guys, the cream of the crop there. We're going to get into that later on in the show. Before we dive into anything, though, I just want to remind everybody, this show is all about you. We love hearing your comments, questions, insights, opinions, anything you want. We want to make the show as interactive, as exciting as possible. One easy way to do that is to use the Super Chat feature. To use that feature, all you have to do, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, type in your comment, question, message there, and send that in. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, gets read live. It's also just a great way to support our show, support our channel, support what we're trying to do here at the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, let's talk some SEC bubble teams in Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina. 3 teams that were right on the cusp in 2024, just barely missed out on the playoff. And they could have been in. There was an argument for at least one of those teams to make the playoff, but obviously did not make it last year. We're going to discuss them in depth, see did they make enough moves this offseason. I want to talk about Alabama first. Alabama, first year under head coach Kalen DeBoer, had a tough year for their standards, right? That's important to note. Alabama's standards are much different than the rest of college football. Still had 9 wins, went 9-3 in the regular season, and then had that really disappointing ReliaQuest Bowl in which they lost to a barely above 500 Michigan team. Really kind of put a damper on the end of that season there for Alabama. They couldn't overtake SMU for that last final playoff spot in last year's rankings. They were the first team out last year, and they did kind of regress last season. Let's be clear with that. Saban's last year compared to this past season in 2024, there was a clear decline in Alabama's play. But I could definitely see them coming back up on the upswing. And there's a couple reasons why. They last year, there were a lot of issues where Alabama's defense, they kind of had some problems. Second half against Georgia, that game, they really just gave up everything, essentially. And then that upset loss to Vanderbilt in Nashville, which one of the great upsets in SEC play in a long time. Vanderbilt finally getting a signature win, coming at the expense of the Tide, though. So Alabama did lose Jihad Campbell, Malachi Moore, but they did add a lot of depth up on the defensive front, as well as in the secondary, right? Through the portal, they got guys, Kelby Collins, Florida, Nikhai Hill-Green, Colorado, both linebackers. They should kind of help take over and maybe fill that hole that Jihad Campbell left there in the middle of that defense. They also brought in Cam Calhoun, cornerback from Utah, to hopefully kind of bolster that position group. And then you look at their offense last year. Offense faltered at multiple points in the season. So at times it was their defense, and at times it was their offense. More so than not, it was the Tide offense that really kind of held them back last year. Most obviously was in that 24-3 loss against Oklahoma. Really a surprising result, considering how much Oklahoma struggled last year in SEC play. They were able to dominate Alabama throughout that entire game. Alabama just couldn't get anything going on offense. And then, the loss to Tennessee, the loss to Michigan, the offense obviously really looked rough there. But there's hope for improvement here. They did finish 22nd in yards per play last year and in scoring offense, which I was a little surprised by. But they were super inconsistent, right, throughout the entire season. Jalen Milroe, exciting quarterback, but the highs were highs and the lows were really ugly lows. They're looking for a little more consistency this year. They're hoping that backup from last year, Ty Simpson, can step into that role and give them a little more consistency from the quarterback position. I think that's something that we're definitely going to see from Alabama this upcoming year. Also, don't discount Ryan Grubb coming back into the fold in the Kalen DeBoer coaching staff. Ryan Grubb, a guy that has been with DeBoer throughout pretty much most of his college stops, obviously was his offensive coordinator at Washington, especially that year they went to the national championship. That was Ryan Grubb's offense. That was his kind of scheme. And they did have some great weapons that year. Michael Penix at quarterback, some of the wide receivers they had there on that team. That was a really stacked Washington offense, but the scheme also really helped them. And I think Ryan Grubb getting back into the fold, coming back as his offensive coordinator after a year where he was the offensive coordinator at the NFL level with the Seahawks, coming back, having that year of pro experience, kind of taking a step back last year in terms of college landscape, should kind of help him to refocus, re-gear towards this Alabama offense. So you have Ty Simpson coming in to replace Jalen Milroe. You also bring in Miami transfer Isaiah Horton to kind of help round out that wide receiver room. Isaiah Horton, 56 catches last year, 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, consistent threat for Miami. You add him to a room that has veteran Jeremy Bernard, as well as, that stud sophomore Ryan Williams. Kid's awesome. I think he's going to be one of the top wideouts in the country. And Ryan Williams is going to be another big reason that Alabama, if they do make it this year, I think a lot of that will be because of his play from that wide receiver position. He showed it last year in flashes, right? Georgia had that really key touchdown at the end of the game. And then just a couple other times throughout the season, you saw just the talent level of Ryan Williams. I'm hoping for a little more consistency this year. Also, name to watch out for, Jalen Mbakwe, former 5-star athlete, a guy that was super highly ranked in his class, kind of switched back and forth between wide receiver and cornerback. Sounds like he might play wide receiver again this year. If you pair him with Isaiah Horton and Ryan Williams, that's a dynamic receiver room. Really going to help out Ty Simpson there. They also added 3 transfers at tight end. They were really low on bodies in the tight end room. And 2 along the offensive line, headlined by Texas A&M transfer Cam Dewberry. He should kind of help solidify that O-line. You still have Caden Proctor coming back at that left tackle position, anchoring the blind side. This is a team that they still have the talent level. They are clearly one of the top teams in the country in terms of talent. I am really big on Kalen DeBoer as well. I would not be surprised to see Alabama back in the college football playoff. I think some of their moves that they made, just mainly in bringing in Ryan Grubb, kind of solidifying some question mark positions there, that's going to be huge for Alabama. I think that they could definitely make the playoff again this year, and I think we're going to see some improvement from this Alabama Crimson Tide team. Now, Ole Miss. So everybody pretty much knows Ole Miss sold out on the 2024 season. They went all in, pushed all their chips towards that table. And they did. I think they had one of the best rosters in college football last year in terms of talent. I think it was a top 2 or 3 roster, but just self-inflicted wounds last year. That Kentucky loss was just brutal at home, losing on the road at Florida in a game where if they won that, they're probably in the college football playoff after they have state the next week. But they're losing a lot here. You lose Dart. You lose Trey Harris. You lose Princely Leon on the defense, Chris Paul on defense, Trey Amos. They have added, though, 20-plus rosters.
So to kind of replace that wide receiver room of Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, who are all gone now, that was their top 3 wideouts. They bring in Oklahoma State wideout Deshaun Stribling, had about 900 receiving yards last year. Bring in Harrison Wallace from Penn State as well. Running backs, that's going to be an interesting one. They let Quinshawn go last year, left for Ohio State. Logan Diggs should kind of take over that role. I'm curious as to how Ole Miss is going to do this year. I think they're much more of a question mark than Alabama is. You have Austin Simmons replacing Jackson Dart. Everything coming out of Oxford sounds like they love Austin Simmons. Lane Kiffin is super high on Austin Simmons, thinks he can be a really great starter for them, and I agree with that. I think this is one of the smartest quarterbacks in college football. The kid graduated this year, and I think he's still 19 years old. He enrolled at Ole Miss at 17 years old. So a kid that is really high IQ quarterback and super talented too. I think he's going to be interesting to watch. This is going to be a team, though, that I'm not sure if they get back to those heights of last season, at least this year. I think it might be more of a rebuilding, kind of retooling year for the Rebels. And then South Carolina. That was that last other kind of SEC team on the bubble, right? South Carolina, now their big thing here is retaining guys. They retain quarterback Lenoris Sellers. That's the biggest thing here. You have Lenoris Sellers, potential Heisman candidate at quarterback, super exciting QB to watch in terms of dual threat ability, can run, has got a can of an arm, and really completed more passes than we thought last year. His completion percentage was really solid. They have a really great outlook coming back in. They finished the season last year on a 6-game winning streak. They were playing with a lot of confidence towards the end of the season. And then they bring in some transfers on defense, and Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, Sean Murphy, and just some of those guys. Brandon Sisse, cornerback out of North Carolina State, coming in, should maybe start at some of those positions of question. They still bring back Dylan Stewart, freshman phenom defensive end, a kid that really kind of showcased his talent last year. I'm looking for him to step into a bigger role. I think that South Carolina is going to be a really interesting team this year, but they do have another difficult schedule this season. You got to go play at Missouri, at LSU, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M. I think they might split those 4 road games, and then you still have Oklahoma, Alabama at home, Vanderbilt, Kentucky. Vanderbilt is really going to be a team that I think could be better than people think, bringing back Diego Pavia. So South Carolina is going to have some challenging games this year. And you still have the rivalry game with Clemson. They also open the season with Virginia Tech in Atlanta. So throughout the entire year, this is going to be a really tough run for South Carolina. I'm high on them, but I could certainly see them maybe faltering in some of these games where it might be more of a toss-up. I think probably a 9-3 type year is realistic, again, for South Carolina. I don't know if they get over the hump this year. I think it's going to be really close. I think it comes down to, can they win some of those tough road matchups, and then can they just stay at home, win at home, right? If you beat those, if you go 3-1 at least in those home games in the SEC, in Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Alabama, I think they have a shot to win around 9 games. I don't know if they get over the hump, though, again, this upcoming season. That's going to be something to watch. That's going to be a big storyline throughout this year is, can South Carolina keep that momentum from last season after ending on that big winning streak? Can they roll that into 2025 and keep that momentum going? And that's going to be a huge, huge question mark for the SEC, for South Carolina this upcoming season. So now we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more college football playoff, but we're going to go up north, talk about Indiana, Illinois, 2 teams that I think are pretty similar. Going to get into who might be a little more likely to make the playoff. But we're going to discuss that when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Just talked some SEC potential college football playoff contenders. Did those kind of question mark teams, did they do enough to get over the hump? We're going to have to find out when the season starts. But continuing on the college football playoff trend, I want to talk about two Big Ten teams that I think are pretty similar, but they're both kind of knocking on that door in Illinois and Indiana. So, first of all, these teams are going to play each other on September 20th at Indiana in Bloomington. Going to be a really exciting matchup. That's really Indiana's big first test of the season. They have a couple of non-conference games before that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. They have a couple of non-conference games before that should be kind of tune-ups for them. Illinois got a little bit of a tougher start to the season, but this is going to be a big-time matchup at the end of September, at the end of that first month. And Indiana, I kind of really like this Indiana team right now. So they obviously do lose quarterback Curtis Rourke. However, how do you replace that guy? You go get another big-time transfer quarterback in Fernando Mendoza from Cal, a dude that was one of the top quarterbacks in the portal after last season, kind of really showcased his talent at Cal, where he threw for 3,000 yards, had 16 touchdowns in that season, and also just had a couple of really big moments too. He was able to come back against Stanford last year, really drive that comeback, really had an impressive performance against Miami as well. But a guy that I really like as a quarterback, I think he's a gamer. We're going to talk a little bit more about Fernando Mendoza later on in the show. But a really good quarterback that Indiana picks up. I think he's an upgrade over Curtis Rourke, so that's a big point there. Then you look at O-line. This could be one of the strengths of their team. So they do return left tackle Carter Smith, who has kind of been their incumbent starter since 2023. There could be a couple transfers here, though, that are going to start. Pat Coogan, big name coming in from Notre Dame at center, should kind of anchor that role. Then you also have Bray Lynch, probably going to be the left guard. Zen Mikulski, transferred in from Ohio State, could potentially take over that right tackle role. So you have a couple of big-time former blue-chip prospects and guys in Pat Coogan who are experienced starters, should really solidify that offensive line. I think this is going to be a really good offensive unit. You also have wide receivers Elijah Surratt coming back, E.J. Williams coming back, super dependable targets, Omar Cooper Jr. as well. And then they brought in a few transfer wideouts too to really kind of bolster that room. I think this offense is going to be really great. Defense, the D-line might be a little more shaky. C.J. West is gone. James Carpenter is gone. But you bring back Mikhail Kamara after a huge 2024 season. This guy is a stud. Had 10 sacks last year, 47 total tackles. He's only 6'1", but he's 265. He's got a really sturdy frame. And he also led the FBS last year with 68 pressures on the quarterback. He's also going to be switching positions. He's going to move to they call it the stud position, kind of a hybrid D-end linebacker role, a stand-up edge guy. But it's really going to allow him to focus more on rushing the passer, which could honestly make his stats look even better. I think those sack numbers could go up. This could be a 12-13 kind of sack type of guy. Quarterback pressures, I don't know if you can really improve after you led the country in quarterback pressures, but I don't know. We're going to see if he can do it. I think that'd be kind of cool. And then at the D-tackle position, they brought in a couple transfers to solidify that in Jose Wheeler and Dominique Ratcliffe, guys that came in that are going to be names to watch there, should really help solidify that. Running back's going to be a little bit of a question mark for them. Going to be relying on Kalen Black, as well as transfers Roman Hemby, Lee Beebe Jr. They should kind of mix in there for the roles. I don't think this is going to be a one running back type situation. I think this is going to be kind of a community by backfield. We're going to see who is playing the best. That's who's going to get the carries here. They did lose a couple their starting safeties. They brought in a couple transfers there, though. Devin Boykin, as well as Lewis Moore. Lewis Moore actually is a guy that was at Indiana, transferred to Ole Miss, and now he transferred back to Indiana. So a guy that could potentially take over those roles. And then you have Amari Farrell, too. Amari Farrell returns. He's going to be in the mix somewhere, playing there somewhere on that defense. But this is a team that stunned the college football world last year. Kurt Cignetti's first season as their head coach, won 10 games. However, it's going to be difficult for them to replicate that season from last year. Yeah, their non-conference schedule, not bad. They have Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State to start the year before that Illinois matchup. But you have 3 really, really tough road games, and you got to go to Iowa to play the Hawkeyes. You have to go to Eugene to play the Oregon Ducks, and you got to go to Happy Valley and play Penn State. I think this could be an 8-4, 9-3 type team for Indiana. This is going to be a tough schedule for them to get through. Then you have Illinois. Illinois quietly won 10 games last season in the Big Ten. And then I still don't know if they're getting enough credit as a potential contender in the Big 12. You look at their returning production. Only Clemson and Arizona State are returning more production at the FBS level. Illinois is bringing back 76% of their returning production. Over 3/4 of that production is returning. So you have an experienced team, a team that performed well last year and is retaining a lot of those guys. You have Luke Altmaier at quarterback. Going to talk about him a little later on in the show, but a guy that's a stud will be the leader there. You also have all 5 starting O-linemen returning, the entire starting secondary returning, and you bring back your star linebacker in Gabe Jackas, who is returning for his 4th year as kind of a big type role. He's been a player there the past 3 seasons. Last year, had 74 total tackles, 8 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, a guy to really watch out for on that defense. Receiver, kind of a question mark here. They need to find new playmakers. There's a couple guys, Malik Elzy, he might be a potential starter here. And then running back, too. They lost Josh McCray, their leading rusher from last year, left in the spring portal to go to Georgia. So they still have a couple guys. Caden Fegan's one of those dudes, but that's a question mark. After you lose your leading rusher in the spring, kind of a tough time to lose them. And then they did add on defense. They added a handful of vet defensive linemen. James Thompson Jr. from Wisconsin. That's going to be one of the big guys for them. He had 5 sacks for Wisconsin the past couple of seasons. However, their schedule is a lot more manageable than Indiana's. So their biggest road matchup might be their non-conference game against Duke, and I believe it's week 2. It's week 2 or 3. It's early on in the season. Or it could be that Indiana matchup where they have to go to Bloomington early on in September, and then potentially the Washington game. Washington's kind of a toss-up for me, but you get OSU and USC at home this year. You also avoid Michigan, Penn State, Oregon. So Ohio State and Indiana are really your 2 biggest, toughest matchups, and then Duke for them too. I think that could be a good game. Where I think Duke's a good team. I think they could beat Illinois, especially because it's at Duke. But they're Illinois' 9 Big Ten opponents this season. They were a combined 33-48 in Big Ten play in 2024. only 2 of those teams in Indiana and Ohio State had a winning Big Ten record. So this is a very manageable schedule for Illinois. I'm curious about the defense here. I think that's the big difference between these two teams right now. If you look at the 2024 defensive stats for both Indiana and Illinois, there's a big difference. In total defense, Indiana was number 2 in the country last year in terms of total defense at the FBS level, whereas Illinois was only 68th. You look at scoring defense. Indiana, again, top 10 at number 6 in the country. Illinois, we're at 31st. Third down defense, big factor. Indiana's 15th in the country. Illinois, 113th in the country. And then turnover margin. Indiana was the number 3 team in the country at plus 15 in terms of turnover margin. Illinois was tied at 35th at plus 6. So Indiana, despite they didn't have bad defensive stats, I'd say, or Illinois didn't have bad defensive stats, but Indiana's were much better. That defense was much stronger overall. They are losing more pieces, but is that disparity going to continue? Will Indiana continue to have a much stronger defense? That's going to be the big question mark, I think, in between these two teams. But if you're looking at the total kind of projection, I think Illinois might be a little more likely, at least this season, to make the college football playoff. When you look at their returning production, you bring back your entire O-line, you bring back your starting quarterback for another year, and you have the momentum still. You have one of the most returning productions in terms of that team, of that roster throughout the country. You're 3rd in returning production in the entire FBS. That's going to be big. And you look at their schedule, it's a lot easier than Indiana's. Indiana has some really tough road matchups this year. Illinois doesn't. They kind of avoid some of those really big-time Big Ten powerhouses. And I think it's a lot more easy to navigate for Illinois than it is for Indiana this upcoming season. But I'm really curious to see this September 20th matchup where Illinois goes into Bloomington, has to play the Hoosiers at their home. That's going to be a big-time matchup. It's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to tell us a lot about these two programs and kind of where they are right now. So we're going to take another quick break on the show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little ACC football, dive into some of those power rankings. So stick with us. We'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Just talk some potential Big Ten college football playoff contenders in Indiana and Illinois. Two teams I think are really going to be interesting to watch this upcoming year. We're going to start, though, on my ACC power rankings right now. Going to start at the bottom, work our way up over the next couple of days, and dive into that. So I think this is an interesting conference. There's kind of a big gap right now between the top and the bottom of the conference, and some of these teams have really been struggling. So I think the team kind of in the worst position right now is Stanford, and I think that's pretty clear to see. Under Troy Taylor, they haven't had great success the past couple years, winning 3 games. they're at least 1 year away. And then you fire Troy Taylor early on in the spring, bring in Frank Reich on an interim basis as the head coach. He won't be there past this 2025 season. He's only going to be there for this upcoming year, kind of going to be a steward of sorts while Andrew Luck launches his nationwide search next kind of off season, it sounds like. So there's one positive in second-year quarterback Elijah Brown. He's going to be the full-time starter. He's going to get plenty of playing time. We're going to kind of see what he can do. But this is really a program very much in transition, with Andrew Luck kind of taking over as the head of football operations, having control pretty much over the entire program. This is a program that they are trying to figure out and navigate their way through this NIL landscape. They still really haven't gotten it yet. And then you look at what happened in the spring portal. They lose some huge pieces. They lose defensive end David Bailey, who's a preseason kind of All-American candidate. You lose really promising freshman wideout Emmett Mosley V, who was one of their big guys last year. He goes to Texas. You lose center Jake McCullough. He leaves. This is a team that they don't have a ton of talent to start with, and then you lose some of your best pieces going forward. I think they're probably going to really struggle again in the ACC this year. I'm curious as to if Frank Reich actually makes a difference here. Obviously, bringing an NFL head coaching experience from his time with the Colts, is that going to help them? Is that going to hurt them? I think it's going to be an interesting situation to watch of just how much impact Frank Reich actually has on this team in terms of just everything, right, across the board. Scheme-wise, play on the field, will it impact their recruiting because guys know that he's only there for 8 months? Will they be able to bring in guys? Will they be able to retain some of their guys going forward? The guys that left, the caliber of those players, such as David Bailey, such as Emmett Mosley, are you going to be able to keep guys like that in the future? These are all huge question marks for Stanford that need to be answered at some point. And then similar to Stanford, the other California school in the Atlantic Coast Conference is California. California in another tough position as a program. You lose your starting quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, who transfers to Indiana. That's a brutal blow for California. It pushed their odds of betting back to 6 wins and a bowl game. That's kind of the hope for Cal this year. Then in the spring, you also lose Jaden Ott, all-pack running back in 2023, that one of their biggest weapons. You lose tight end Jack Endries as well. He goes to Texas. So you lose your quarterback, you lose your most productive running back, you lose your tight end, who was your most productive pass catcher last year. He led the entire team in terms of reception and receiving yards last season. So those are massive losses. And then, besides Jaden Ott, they also lost another 3 or 4 running backs in the portal. I can't remember the exact number. It's either 4 or 5 guys that they completely lost from that running back room. So that room has to be totally rebuilt. And then, of their first 5 games, 3 of them are road games. They have to go to Oregon State. They have to go to San Diego State. They have to go to Boston College. And then they also have a 4th road matchup against Minnesota, who could potentially be strong. I don't know. Not a huge believer in Minnesota, but I think right now I believe in them a little more than I do in Cal. But there are some pluses. They bring in quarterback Devin Brown, who had spent the past couple years in Ohio State's room, was the primary backup for a while. So that's one option at quarterback. And then you also have a really promising freshman. They were able to get back into the fold in Jaron Sagapatole, kid that's a 4-star prospect, a really high-ranked recruit for Cal, promising guy that could be their quarterback of the future. So in terms of quarterback, yes, you lose Fernando Mendoza. That's a huge blow, but it could potentially work out for them down the line. I just don't know if it works out for them in 2025. I think this is going to be a team that could have another really rough year, and it's going to be interesting to see. Wake Forest then is my 15th ranked ACC team. They're kind of entering into a new era. So Dave Clawson gone. They bring in first-year head coach Jake Dickert from Washington State, and he added a bunch of transfers. Brought in a couple guys from Washington State with him to kind of fill up the depth chart. That should help the transition for sure from Wake Forest. When you bring in guys that are already familiar with the new head coach, are already familiar with the schemes that he wants to run, that's always going to help. It's going to be interesting, but they have an easier non-conference schedule. They have to go perfect in their non-conference schedule if they really want a chance to be bowl eligible. But a team that's very much in transition right now in Wake Forest, I'm curious to see how Jake Dickert does there as their head coach, a guy that had Washington State. They had a much more successful season last year than I was really expecting. Will that kind of transition to Wake Forest? We're going to have to wait and see there. But first-year head coach, a team that has a lot of roster turnover. It's going to be interesting to see. I think they really need to nail down that non-conference schedule games. They need to win those in order to be bowl eligible, potentially be bowl eligible down the line. Then Virginia Tech I have at 14. Now, Virginia Tech I think is really interesting. Last season, going into the season, they were kind of a dark horse candidate for potentially making some noise in the ACC, potentially being a top 25 team that had kind of been projected going into last season, but they never got off the ground last year. Barely squeezed into the postseason, becoming bowl eligible. The one big key here is the return of quarterback Kyron Jones. So Kyron Jones was a guy that kind of had some low-key Heisman talk last year as a candidate there, but had a really injury-plagued year last season, kind of struggled throughout the year, never really seemed to get going, kind of reach those 2023 levels. Can he kind of get back to that level? He's going to need to be protected better up front. He's going to need more help from the backfield. They did add a couple different running backs there that should help out Kyron Jones, but it's going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot resting on his shoulders, and I think that's going to be the big expectation is, can Kyron Jones get back to those 2023 levels where he was really seen as one of the more promising quarterbacks in the country, a guy that could potentially lift Virginia Tech to some greater heights than they've seen in the past couple years. Will he be able to do that? It's pretty much going to rest on his shoulders, I think. And if he can come back, stay healthy, kind of return some of that production, Virginia Tech could be a lot better than where I have them ranked right now. But that's still a huge question mark. I think they're going to be an interesting team to watch, and we're just going to have to kind of watch out for them. Now, 13, I have North Carolina State. And North Carolina State, they're really one of the more unpredictable teams kind of in the Power 4 realm. Dave Doran, head coach there, his track record kind of says that last year's 5-win team, that should be an anomaly. They should kind of bounce back, but this roster still isn't super strong. The state of it is kind of a question mark, and I think this might be a team where there's another year of kind of hovering right around bowl eligibility, 5, 6, 7 wins. But North Carolina State certainly could surprise us and bounce back and have a really strong year. I think they're too well coached to kind of struggle for that long. I just don't know if this roster is talented enough and is able to kind of push them over that marker. We're going to have to see, though. I think they're going to be one of the more interesting teams to kind of watch and see where they end up throughout the season in terms of ACC play and in terms of throughout the country. And then I have Virginia at 12. So Virginia, this is a team, a program that really hasn't been super strong historically. They do bring in a really good transfer quarterback in Chandler Morris, who was at North Texas this past season, but a guy that has been around the world of college football. He was at SMU for a while, started there for a season, and then has kind of bounced around, started at North Texas last year. But this is a guy that's going to come in right away, give head coach Tony Elliott a strong, experienced quarterback, something that they haven't really had in a while. They had Brendan Armstrong a couple years ago, but I think Chandler Morris is a higher caliber of quarterback and a guy that's going to give them a big boost in the passing game in just terms of reliability and experience. And then they have a pretty smooth non-conference slate, but they miss Clemson, Miami, Georgia Tech, and SMU. They don't have to play any of those 4 teams this year, which I think are 4 of the stronger programs in the ACC this upcoming season. So you avoid all of those teams. You have a more manageable ACC slate that really kind of bodes well for success for the 2025 season for the Virginia Cavaliers. That's a huge thing. Scheduling is huge. Just like I talked about with Indiana and Illinois, I think Indiana might be a stronger team, but Illinois has a better, easier schedule. I think that's kind of similar to Virginia and some of these other teams like Virginia Tech, like North Carolina State. I don't know if Virginia's roster overall is stronger compared to some of these programs, but looking at that schedule, you don't have to play Clemson, you don't have to play Miami, you don't have to play SMU. Those are huge teams that you avoid, and it makes their season a lot easier to navigate. And I think that's something to definitely watch out for with the Virginia Cavaliers, is that schedule, kind of who they have to play and who they don't have to play. So we're going to take another short break here. When we come back, we're going to continue the ACC trend, talk a little about Clemson. But stick with us. We'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
I accidentally clicked the outro video. That is not what I wanted to do. But welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Just did my ACC Power Rankings. Starting that, we're going to continue on the ACC trend and talk about Clemson. Is Clemson football back? This is an interesting program, an interesting team, and a team that has really kind of seemed like they haven't kind of embraced this new era of college football, but is that kind of changing? When Dabo Swinney was asked earlier this week in an interview with The Athletic if he thought he was the right guy for this era, if he ever kind of questioned could he actually do it, he was surprised by the question, which doesn't really happen to Dabo Swinney, and he basically said no, absolutely not. He kind of went on a whole monologue, that's Dabo Swinney's type thing, and he was like, I've had as much fun these past few years as I've had ever throughout coaching. And it's interesting, that's a lot different than kind of what we've been hearing from Dabo the past few years. He's been a guy that's historically kind of been resistant to change. But I think one kind of little anecdote that's interesting and kind of showcases this Clemson program is last year, Cabe Klubnik was called into Dabo Swinney's office. He had kind of been coming off an uneven first year as a starter, and there were calls for Clemson to replace him by fans, by media outlets, by a lot of different sources. There were agents from quarterbacks calling, seeing if that position was potentially open at Clemson to start. And so Klubnik got called into the office, and Dabo Swinney basically sat him down and said, listen, you're my guy. We're going to lean on you. We're not changing quarterbacks. You're not going anywhere. This is your team. This is your offense. And so then Cade Klubnik goes off. And what does he do last season? He finishes second in the ACC in touchdown passes behind only Cam Ward. Enters this year with a little bit of Heisman buzz, and he kind of looked back on that sit down as a turning point. So that story, I think, really showcases the overall kind of judgment viewpoint of the Clemson program and why Clemson's positioned well for this new era. So for years, the narrative has been that, Dabo's been reluctant to take transfers, and this was easy to tie to the dip in the program's kind of performance from, they had the 2015 to 2020 run where they're in the college football playoff every year, pretty much in contention every single season. Then you go pretty much after 2020, and it almost co-aligns with when NIL all really started. They've kind of had a dip in the on-field. So when you look at the timing, it was pretty easy to say that, hey, okay, this makes sense. Clemson's not bringing in transfers. They're not winning. Boom. That's easy. But this has kind of changed, especially when you look at last season. So last season, Clemson sneaks in to the playoff, wins the ACC, and they weren't really in contention throughout the year. It was pretty much SMU, Miami. Those were the two big programs that were being mentioned as ACC champions throughout the entire year. That doesn't happen. It's the Clemson Tigers that win. They sneak into the playoff. They do lose in their first round matchup to Texas by 2 touchdowns, which was actually the closest first round matchup last year. But so even despite they lose, this run of getting into the college football playoff really has kind of reinstalled confidence, a sense of validation in this Clemson program. So, and Clemson added 3 transfers this offseason, which obviously not a huge number, but when you're looking at what Clemson has added previously, that's a big difference. They add 3 transfers. They bring in a couple guys. Their athletic director writes a letter to the Clemson fans saying that they plan on using that entire portion of the revenue sharing potentially coming down from the House settlement. They were planning on sharing the maximum amount of revenue. And then that same week, Dabo Swinney kind of said that this is not going to be the same. Nobody's now going to have more money than us at Clemson, and we might actually be on a kind of a level playing field. Then their overall strategy is still staying the same. They're recruiting, they're developing, they're training their guys. Maybe they don't bring in as many transfers, but they don't lose any. Clemson, they also are still emphasizing academics. They annually have one of the top graduation rates throughout college football. They had 99% mark, which was tied for the best at the power conference level in the most recent NCAA survey. So this is something where they are banking on that culture. They're banking on that to capitalize on kind of the new market inefficiency where there's players that obviously are going to do the NIL, are going to try to get the most money they can. But then there's the other guys that, they want more of that old school college football approach where they go to a program, they develop there, they go to school there, they finish there. That's what Clemson's trying to emphasize. And that could potentially help them when you have recruits that may be getting turned off by, this everybody's transferring every year. You're kind of just trying to get more and more money each season. That could turn off some guys. In a recent interview, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, who are 2 of their huge leaders, both in terms of on the field and in the locker room, they both said that this makes players work harder for the program. They want to see their program do well. They want to kind of reward their loyalty. And if you look at all along, Clemson was never really winning with elite recruiting classes. Yes, you did have Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence come in, 2 huge quarterbacks. But if you go back to his first class, Dabo Swinney's first class at Clemson in 2009 to present day, their average recruiting ranking is 13.9, so basically 13th, 14th in the country. So they've never been a top 5 recruiting team. They've never been, yes, there's certain years where that kind of happened, but for the most part, that hasn't really been the case at Clemson. And even after Trevor Lawrence left, Clemson still went 9-3, or 10-3, 11-3, 9-4, 10-4. So 4 straight years of at least 9+ wins. And this is a program that the expectations have completely changed since he's been there. You look at, they've won 3 national championships in 130 seasons, but now the expectation pretty much is every year they're competing for a national championship. And if they're not, it's kind of a disappointment. You also look at changes in the coaching staff. Dabo Swinney is a guy that's historically been resistant to change on the coaching staff, but in the past few seasons, brings in Garrett Riley in 2023 before that season from TCU to run the offense. This year makes another huge hire on defense in bringing in former Penn State defensive coordinator Tom Allen to kind of help that unit. And Dabo Swinney, he had all the facts. He's like, we're the 5th winningest team in the country since 2020. We've been to the playoffs 7 out of the last 10 years. This team that's won the ACC 8 out of the last 10 years. So in the past 10 seasons, they've won 8 ACC titles. They've won 2 national championships. So 10 total championships in the past decade for Clemson. This is not a program that really did fall off. If we actually think about it, yeah, they had a couple years where they weren't, top 3 in the country, top 4 in the country, but this is a program that's still consistently competing at the highest level of the sport. And if you think about it, Dabo Swinney's always been that kind of voice of resistance, the face of resistance, but he's really said now recently that that's not the case. He wants this to change, kind of. He said this is the best time in college football history. Did still sound like a traditionalist at times, of course. That's just kind of how he is. But he's been a guy that's advocated for the Super League, a new Super League, a guy that's been excited about that possibility. Hasn't really bemoaned players getting paid, not traded. And a team that I think is going to be open to still keeping their standards, still keeping kind of that team culture while improving on the margins. You bring in transfers that fit your program. You pay the guys that you want to keep. That's going to be huge for Clemson. In the short term, they're excited about this season. Klubnik is in his 3rd year as a starter now. You have 8 starters back on each side of the ball. And you also have their kicker returning, who basically won the ACC for them. And then in the long term, Clemson should be positioned pretty well, if you think about it. The end of their lawsuit against the ACC means that they could potentially change conferences, move into a better one in the next few seasons, and they're probably going to get more money because of the league's new revenue distribution model, where TV ratings are king. Clemson, obviously, in terms of ACC programs, their games are going to drive a lot of eyeballs. And this is going to be a team that might have an easier path to the college football playoff than a lot of other big-time brands. So I think Clemson, I don't know if they ever left. Let's be honest. This is a team that's still going to be up there. This is a program that will be one of the top 10 programs in the country in this kind of next era, I think. If they maintain their culture and add on the margins, kind of incorporate these concepts slowly, this could be a program that really maintains their run of success. So we're going to take our last short break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk a little more Big Ten, finish off my Big Ten quarterback list and those rankings. So stick with us. We'll be back on the GSMC College Football Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Just talked a little bit about Clemson football, if they can stay, compete in this new era. I think they can. I'm excited to see them this upcoming year. They have a really great quarterback in Cade Klubnik. We're going to keep on that quarterback kind of train, and we're going to talk a little bit about Big Ten quarterbacks, finish off my list with the top 4 guys in the league, in my opinion. At 4, I think it's got to be Nico. Nico Yamaleva transferred from Tennessee, now at UCLA. Huge storyline throughout the spring. This was super unexpected. I don't know if anybody kind of saw Nico not suiting up for the Tennessee Volunteers in 2025, but that's going to be the case. That's the reality now. And this is a guy that is a really solid starting quarterback in his own right. Dude that led Tennessee last year to a 10-3 record, college football playoff appearance, had decent stats last year. Finished with 2,900 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. The big question mark, how will he adjust to Big Ten play under head coach Deshaun Foster? Will he kind of be able to transition from the SEC to the Big Ten? Yes, they're very comparable leagues in terms of the talent across the board, but there's a lot of different play styles when you look at the SEC compared to the Big Ten, and that offense that he's going to be running. Tennessee's offense is very much different. They kind of run that veer-style offense, super spread wide. That's not going to be what he's going to run at UCLA. It's going to be a much more of a pro-style offense, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see where he actually ends up here. So he did have solid stats last year, but if you really look at it, it was kind of interesting where the split was. 13 of those 19 touchdowns came against North Carolina State, Kent State, Mississippi State, and UTEP. Then, if you look at the 5 or 6 games against Oklahoma, Arkansas, Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, so they're tougher SEC matchups in the conference. In those 6 games, he had 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So, big production against lower caliber programs, but when the lights were brightest, this was a guy that really struggled against top-tier opponents. Can he kind of take that next step as a quarterback? Can he be more comfortable in this season at UCLA? It's going to be interesting. He's not going to have as many weapons around him. It's going to be a lot more on Nico to kind of showcase his talents. And this is a kid that, mind you, he was a 5-star quarterback. He's got all the talent in the world in terms of raw tools, potential, 6'6", cannon for an arm, smart quarterback, a guy that really has high potential. Can he kind of put it all together this year, running a different offense, having different weapons around him? It's going to be huge, and I think we're really going to kind of see Nico's potential and his ability as a quarterback this year when there's a lot more pressure on him to produce at UCLA, especially after this whole transfer saga that kind of happened throughout the spring that we saw play out. So right now I have him at 4. That's very fluid, though. I think he could either be really up there or he might completely slide down this list of Big Ten rankings. But then at 3, you have Indiana starting quarterback Fernando Mendoza. Kind of talked about him a little bit earlier on in the show. This is a kid I love. I think he's a gamer, a guy that's just going to win football games, a guy that his stats may not look awesome, but when you watch him and the plays that he makes on the field, the positions that he puts his team in to try to win football games, this is a really good quarterback. And I think he's going to do better this year, honestly, at Indiana. Coming in from Cal, he's going to have more weapons around him. He's got a really great wide receiver room, especially with Elijah Surratt coming back. That kid's awesome. And then you have a solid O-line in front of him. They did bring in transfers there, but should be protected better than he was at Cal. And a guy that in Cal's last 4 games averaged 318 yards passing with 8 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in those 3 games, or last 4 games. So a guy that really ended the season on a high note. And then he just had some big-time moments. That Miami game, yeah, they should have won it. I mean, they did lose it at the end, but his performance there against that Miami defense was really great to see. And then also led that comeback win against Stanford in the rivalry game, where they came back right at the end of the game, last couple minutes left. He led a drive down the field to put them in position to win that football game. I'm excited to see what he could do. Oh yeah, he also went into Auburn, went on the Plains last year, beat Auburn at their own home. That's a huge win. This is a guy that I don't think he's afraid of the big moments. I think he kind of thrives on them. I'm excited to see what he can do at a more high-profile program at this time in Indiana compared to Cal, where this is a team that could potentially compete for a college football playoff berth. I think Fernando Mendoza is going to have a really great season, and I'm kind of excited to see what he can do there. Then at 2 is the other quarterback from the other team I talked about earlier, Luke Altmaier. Now this kid, honestly, I was a little surprised of how he's kind of turned out as a quarterback, a guy that was in competition with Jackson Dart when Dart transferred in to Ole Miss from USC. They were both in competition for that starting role. Obviously, Jackson Dart ends up winning out, and Luke Altmaier ends up transferring out to Illinois. But this is a guy that led Illinois to 10 wins last year, was second among returning Big Ten quarterbacks in terms of touchdown passes last season, a guy that's now going to be a 3-year starter, and had only 6 interceptions in 2024. He is going to be a huge reason, and he is already a huge reason of why Illinois is kind of being considered as a potential college football playoff contender, is because of Luke Altmaier. It's because of his play on the field, because of his caliber of leadership, the type of talent that he brings to the Illinois football team. He's going to have chances to prove it this year. Going to play at Indiana, going to have Ohio State at home. And I think they're going to be an interesting team to watch. Illinois, if they do make the college football playoff, a big part of it is going to be Luke Altmaier and his play on the field and kind of what he can do. But there's stability here in the room, a guy that's super experienced, a guy that's comfortable at Illinois in that scheme, and a dude that is really going to take the next step as a starting quarterback. I think he's going to be even better this upcoming season just because of returning, having that experience, having that comfort level of that continuity. Those are all huge things for Luke Altmaier and for the Illinois Fighting Illini. They're going to be an interesting team to watch. It's going to be a lot of fun, though. I think he's the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, and I think he's a little underrated across national media just in terms of the recognition that he gets or that he does not get. But then, the number 1 quarterback, this is an easy one. It's got to be Drew Aller from Penn State. Again, a dude that will be stepping into another year as a full-time starter. Was really big win for Penn State that he decided to return. I think he could have been a first-round quarterback this year just in this draft class. A guy that stepped up last season. He kind of showcased more of his passing talent, but a dude that over the past 2 seasons has had 49 touchdowns, only 10 interceptions. He did, however, have 7 games of less than 200 yards. Part of that, I think, is just the offense that Penn State runs, relying heavily on the running game. But he's going to have to be more consistent in terms of game-to-game kind of statistics, how his performance throughout the season. He got better at it last year. He's going to need to be even stronger on that this year, especially with Tyler Warren being gone. But you have Trevor Pena, you have Kyron Hudson, you have Devontae Ross coming in at wide receiver. You still have Singleton and Allen. This is a guy that's probably the most talented quarterback in the Big Ten. Probably has the highest upside in terms of quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And a guy that has already kind of proven that he can do it. He does need to get better in clutch moments. Had a chance to beat Ohio State this year. They couldn't do it. He did throw a crucial interception in the semifinal against Notre Dame that really sealed that game when Penn State had a chance to win. But in terms of talent. 6'5", 235, cannon of an arm, smart quarterback, humble. All the physical tools, all the intangibles that you want out of a starting quarterback. I think Drew Aller is going to have an even better year this year. I'm excited to see if he can progress even further in terms of his development, in terms of gaining more confidence to kind of make those big-time throws, big-time decisions. We're going to have to kind of see how that plays out. There's going to be more reliance on Drew Aller's arm, though, this year, especially because they lose such a huge weapon in Tyler Warren, a guy that was able to clean up any kind of mistakes that Aller made. He's not going to have that safety option this year. So it's going to be on him to produce at that position. I think he can do it. I think he can rise to the occasion, but cutting down on those kind of critical mistakes, showing up at the end of games, that's what Drew Aller has to show this year for Penn State, for their Big Ten chances, for their potential national championship aspirations. Drew Aller has to improve in those key moments. So with that, we are going to end our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, like, follow the channel, and if you want, you can also go to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok for even more sports updates, more sports content that you love. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.